In just one whirlwind year, everything changed for Maria Loba, a 28-year-old janitor working the night shift at a downtown corporate tower. She was invisible to most, pushing her cart through hallways at 2 a.m., wiping glass, emptying bins, humming to herself in French, Spanish, or Mandarin, whatever matched her mood. What no one knew was that Maria spoke 9 languages fluently, a skill she picked up growing up in a refugee camp where she helped translate between aid workers and dozens of displaced families. She cleaned to survive, but her mind was a cathedral of words, culture, and resilience. One evening, as she quietly cleaned the executive boardroom, the CEO, David Langston, walked in on a call with international investors. His translator was late. The meeting was tense until Maria gently interrupted in flawless German. She translated the entire negotiation in real time, then did the same in Japanese, then Portuguese. Stunned, the CEO sat speechless. The next morning, he invited her to his office, not to fire her, but to promote her. In a matter of weeks, Maria became the company's official liaison for global partnerships. She helped close 3 international deals, trained staff in cross-cultural communication, and was soon flown to Singapore, Paris, and Dubai. The same colleagues who used to ignore her now scrambled to keep up with her brilliance. Within 12 months, Maria was named Director of Global Relations, and during the company's annual meeting, the CEO introduced her to thunderous applause, saying, "The smartest person in this company was cleaning our floors. Shame on us for not noticing sooner." The entire office stood, but Maria didn't cry. She smiled gently, took the mic and said, "Respect people before you know their story. Because you might be standing next to someone fluent in more than just language. They might be fluent in survival." After that speech, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause so loud it echoed down to the very janitor closet Maria had once called her break room. But she didn't let the new title change her heart. In the weeks that followed, Maria launched an internal mentorship program called Hidden Voices, designed to find and support underutilized talent inside the company. She visited every department, spoke to security guards, mailroom clerks, food service workers, and maintenance staff. She listened, really listened, like she had back in the refugee camps, because she understood that brilliance often hides in the quietest corners. One of the cafeteria cooks, an older man named Benji, shyly mentioned he once designed software back in Nigeria. 2 weeks later, Maria helped get him enrolled in the company's tech retraining course. A part-time receptionist, Clara, revealed she was a poet published in 5 languages. Maria encouraged the CEO to host a multilingual open mic event, and Clara's words brought an entire auditorium to tears. Maria's influence wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable. Every floor she walked into grew warmer, more alert, more alive. Her presence began to shift the culture itself. Executives started attending janitor staff meetings. Interns got one-on-one coaching with department heads, and the company introduced a new motto on every wall. Every voice matters, every story counts. But even amid the success, Maria still made time for her roots. She often stopped by to chat with the new cleaning staff, always in their native language, always remembering their names. And once a month, she hosted a quiet lunch on the rooftop garden. No titles, no business, just stories shared in the air from people who once felt invisible. By the end of the year, when Forbes ran a surprise feature on the world's most unexpected corporate leader, Maria's photo graced the cover, not in a power suit, but in the same cleaning uniform she wore her first night on the job. The article simply read, "She didn't change the company. She reminded it how to listen." And that's how, in just 1 year, the janitor everyone overlooked became the heartbeat of a billion-dollar company. Maria's story didn't just stop. With recognition, it became a spark that ignited transformation far beyond her office walls. Shortly after the Forbes feature, universities and think tanks began reaching out. Ivy League deans invited her to speak on diversity and potential. she declined most. "I'm not here to be a symbol," she said once in an interview. "I'm here to build doors for people who've been locked out." But there was one invite she did accept, from a small community college she once applied to but couldn't afford. She returned not as a student, but as keynote speaker at their commencement. Standing before a sea of first-generation grads, she looked out at the crowd and said, "I used to clean places like this. Now I walk into boardrooms with my head up, not because I speak 9 languages, but because I finally speak for myself." Inspired by that speech, the school launched the Maria Loba Scholarship for Hidden Talents, a full-ride fund for immigrants, refugees, and those working low-wage jobs while chasing their dreams. Within a month, it had raised over $500,000, much of it anonymously donated by Maria's colleagues and partners. Back at the company, Maria kept her new office minimal: 1 plant, a few framed photos of her family, and a world map with pins showing every place she'd helped secure a new partnership. But the most important thing on her desk was a worn-out notebook, her language journal from years ago. In it, she used to write phrases in different tongues, quotes, bits of poetry she'd translate on her night shifts. Now, she used it to track the names and passions of every invisible genius she met. By the year's end, the company saw record growth, not just in revenue, but in retention, morale, and innovation. Analysts kept trying to quantify the Maria effect, but she laughed at the idea. "It's not magic," she told them. "It's just what happens when people feel seen." One night, nearly a year to the day since she was discovered in that boardroom, Maria walked through the building again, not as a janitor, but as a guest speaker for new hires. She paused outside the cleaning closet where it all began. The door now bore a small plaque. The world didn't give her a pedestal, so she built one out of purpose. And just like that, Maria smiled, tucked her journal under her arm, and walked into the future, still humble, still hungry, and still speaking the universal language of dignity. ChatGPT said, that winter, as snow glazed the city skyline and holiday lights shimmered through glass towers, Maria found herself invited to a private dinner hosted by Fortune 500 CEOs. Seated between executives with decades of Ivy League pedigrees, she wore a simple navy dress and a locket with her mother's picture inside, a woman who once taught her Swahili and Tagalog by candlelight in a refugee tent. When asked to give a toast, Maria stood slowly, her voice calm but resolute. "I used to clean these kinds of floors with my head down. Now I'm here because someone chose to look up. My hope is that you don't just celebrate stories like mine. You start searching for the ones around you right now." The room went silent. Glasses were raised, but it wasn't just in respect. It was in reflection. Back at the office, Maria's Hidden Voices initiative had quietly expanded into a nationwide movement. Other companies were now replicating the model, assigning internal ambassadors to listen for talent overlooked in uniforms and behind cubicles. A janitor in Detroit was promoted to lead a recycling innovation team after submitting sketches Maria encouraged him to send. A mailroom clerk in Atlanta, fluent in Russian and Cantonese, became a bridge to new global clients. Maria personally mentored every one of them via Zoom after hours. But success didn't shield her from criticism. Some called her rise a fluke. Others dismissed her programs as charity disguised as policy. Yet Maria never flinched. When a radio host asked her, "How does it feel to go from nobody to somebody?" she replied, "I was never a nobody. I was just someone you never bothered to meet." Behind that strength, though, were quiet battles. Maria still worked extra hours, still supported her younger siblings through college, still sent money back to the refugee center where she learned to speak 9 languages under gunfire and grief. She had grown wings, but she never forgot the dust. On the anniversary of her promotion, the company hosted a tribute event. Unbeknownst to Maria, every person she had helped that year flew in: janitors, cafeteria staff, single moms, immigrants, ex-felons turned managers. They each wore a pin shaped like an ear, symbolizing the legacy she left, listening deeply. When Maria walked into the auditorium and saw hundreds standing in her honor, She cried for the first time in public. But they weren't tears of pride. They were the tears of a woman who once whispered 9 languages into empty hallways and now watched 1,000 voices echo back. And as the room applauded, Maria didn't take the stage. Instead, she stepped down into the crowd and handed the mic to the youngest intern in the room. Because that was her revolution, not building her own platform, but making sure no one ever had to clean the floor to be heard again. Maria, meanwhile, kept a low profile. She turned down book deals and high-paying talk shows. She said, "If people only want my story and not my mission, they're not listening." Instead, she focused on launching a global platform, Lingua Lite, a non-profit dedicated to identifying and training multilingual individuals from low-income backgrounds for roles in diplomacy, translation, and international business. Its first class included 87 students from 12 countries. Maria taught the opening workshop herself from a modest office with a chalkboard, writing in block letters, "Your tongue is power. Use it to build bridges, not barriers." By year's end, Time magazine named her Voice of the Year. But when reporters showed up at her door for a cover photo, they found her outside, helping an elderly neighbor fix a broken fence, sleeves, rolled up dirt on her hands. When asked for a quote, she shrugged and said, "I just want the next girl scrubbing floors to know. She's not waiting for a miracle. She might already be one." And with that, Maria Loba returned to her day, not as a janitor, not as a director, not as a media icon, but as a woman who knew exactly who she was, a bridge between worlds, built out of grit, humility, and the unshakable belief that every life matters when someone finally decides to listen. 1 year. That's all it took to turn silence into a legacy. ChatGPT said, as the seasons changed and another new year approached, Maria's name had become synonymous with quiet revolution, not just in boardrooms or social media, but in living rooms, cafeterias, and break rooms across the country. Yet through it all, she never lost her rhythm, never forgot the cadence of her former life, the soft squeak of mop wheels, the early morning bus rides, the late-night whisper of dreams scribbled in the margins of grocery receipts. One day, she received an envelope, handwritten, postmarked from a refugee camp in Uganda. Inside was a photograph. 3 young girls huddled together, holding an old, worn book Maria had donated years ago through a literacy program. On the back, in shaky penmanship, it read, "We heard your story. Now we believe in ours. We are learning your 9 languages." Maria sat for a long time, holding that photo, tears slipping quietly down her face. She pinned it above her desk, next to a simple paper sign that said, "Legacy is what grows in silence after you've gone." She made one final bold move that year. After countless meetings and internal debates, the company, at her urging, eliminated degree requirements for dozens of roles, replacing them with aptitude-based assessments and internal mentorship ladders. When asked if she was worried about performance slipping, Maria simply said, "I bet on people, not paper." It was a national headline. Within months, several Fortune 100 companies followed suit. Maria had inadvertently helped shift corporate America's thinking not with fury, but with proof. Proof that talent lives everywhere, especially where no one bothers to look. In private moments, Maria remained humble. She still made her own coffee, still greeted janitors by name, still brought extra food to meetings, just in case someone skipped lunch. Her office door remained open, not symbolically, but literally. Anyone could walk in. On the final day of the year, the CEO, David Langston, hosted a gathering to mark 12 months since Maria's promotion. But instead of giving a speech, he handed the microphone to her again. She took a breath, looked at the packed room and said, "The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more listeners, more people willing to notice the janitor who speaks 9 languages, the cook who writes poetry, the driver who dreams in code. The next big idea isn't sitting in a tower, it's probably scrubbing the floor beneath it." I was never discovered. I was finally acknowledged, and that's all anyone is really asking for. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just a silence so deep it felt like the building itself was listening. As the crowd stood and applauded, many with tears in their eyes, Maria stepped down from the stage, walked back to the janitor's hallway, and opened the closet door one last time. Inside, someone had written on the wall, "She walked through this door, so we could walk through all the rest." And Maria, quietly smiling, whispered back in 9 languages that all meant the same thing: keep going. That night, long after the applause faded and the office lights dimmed, Maria stayed behind once more. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The janitor's hallway, the echoing corridor where her life had changed, felt more like a cathedral than a workplace. She ran her hand along the smooth metal of her old cart, still neatly tucked away in the supply closet, untouched since the day she stepped into the boardroom and rewrote her destiny. She whispered softly to it, "Thank you for carrying me before the world did." In the months that followed, Maria's impact began to bloom in places she'd never even visited. Schools in rural towns introduced language clubs named after her. A children's book, Maria's Many Words, was released, telling her story through the eyes of a curious little girl with a mop and a dream. It became a bestseller, translated into 14 languages within its first quarter. But Maria didn't seek the spotlight. She spent that spring traveling, quietly, anonymously, visiting shelters, ESL classrooms, immigrant job centers, and prisons. She sat in circles with people who felt discarded by society and simply asked, "What would you do if someone believed in you?" She carried with her a notebook, filling page after page with their answers. Her new project, a national database that connected hidden talent to companies hungry for real stories, real skill, and real resilience. She named it the Bridge Index, not a charity, a network, not pity, opportunity. Maria had learned the difference between being helped and being seen. She would give no one permission to feel invisible again. That summer, at a tech summit in San Francisco, a panel of executives was asked, "What's your biggest innovation this year?" One CEO smiled and said, "Hiring janitors like Maria before someone else does." And yet, back in her own office, Maria kept the same plant by the window, the same world map on the wall. The pushpins had multiplied, but her ritual never changed. Every Friday, she removed one pushpin, stared at the spot on the map it represented, and asked herself, who's still waiting there to be heard? Late in the year, she received an email. From a girl named Amara in Cameroon. She wrote, "I sweep floors in a hospital and practice English between surgeries. People say I'm wasting time, but then I read about you. Now I know, I'm just early. Thank you for being the proof." Maria replied the same day, in Amara's native language. "You are not early. You are right on time. Keep going. I'm saving you a seat." And as another year dawned, Maria stood on the rooftop of the company that once overlooked her, watching the sunrise spill golden light over the city she now helped shape. She didn't raise her hands in triumph. She folded them in gratitude. Because, in just 1 year, the janitor who spoke 9 languages taught the entire world one universal truth. When we stop looking down, we rise. ChatGPT said autumn came, crisp and golden, and with it came invitations from governments, global NGOs, and educational giants. Maria respectfully declined most of them. Change, she often said, doesn't live in headlines, it lives in hallways. She believed her mission still lived where she started, in the corners, the closets, the break rooms, places most people passed without notice. One afternoon, while leading a workshop for a new cohort of Hidden Voices apprentices, Maria paused when a quiet woman in the back raised her hand. She was older, with deep lines around her eyes and a badge that read, "Evening Custodial Staff." She asked in a barely audible voice, "What if no one ever gives you that chance?" Maria walked toward her, knelt beside her chair, and said, "Clearly enough for the room to hear. Then you build the door yourself, and if it doesn't open, you climb through the window. And if there's no window, you become the light outside that makes people see the wall was never meant to be there." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that rises from people who've spent years unheard. That woman, whose name was Esther, would go on to invent a new sanitation protocol that saved the company over $2 million in health safety costs. Maria nominated her for a National Innovation Award. Esther won. That was Maria's style. She never kept the light to herself. She used it to ignite others. One evening, as she sat at her desk after hours, a janitor entered shyly with a mop and a clipboard. He stopped, startled. "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt." Maria smiled. "You didn't. Come in." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "I've been working on something," he said, holding up the clipboard. "It's just some notes about redesigning our supply system. I've seen a lot of waste. I think we can cut that down." Maria took the clipboard gently and began reading. Her eyes lit up. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" He shook his head. "Didn't think anyone would care." Maria looked up. "I care." The next week, he was presenting his redesign in front of the logistics team. By the end of the month, he had a title change. By the end of the year, he had a team of his own. His story was added to the wall outside the janitor's closet, a mosaic of portraits titled "The Ones We Almost Missed." Maria stood before that wall often, not to admire her work, but to remember the stakes. Every story she saved was a voice that might have gone forever unheard. And to her, that was sacred work. Near the close of the year, the company hosted a surprise event, this time not in her honor, but in the honor of all those Maria had lifted. Over 200 people whose lives had changed through her programs gathered in the main atrium. They took turns sharing one sentence each. Sentences like, "I'm not ashamed of my uniform anymore. I coded my first app last month. I called my mother in our language and told her I got promoted." They finally listened. She made me believe I was more than my job. Maria didn't speak that night. She stood at the back, hand over her heart, tears brimming but unspilled. Because for her this was the reward. Not titles, not travel, not fame. Transformation. That winter she returned once more to the service elevator, pressed the button, and took the long ride down to sub-level 2. She stood in silence at the janitor's closet, now repurposed into a mentorship room. Inside were shelves of books, multilingual dictionaries, leadership guides, and a plaque bearing 9 phrases, each in a different language. Together, they all meant the same thing. I see you. Maria turned off the light, closed the door gently behind her, and whispered into the stillness. May no one ever have to wait as long as I did to be seen. And with that, she walked away. Not as a janitor, not as an executive, not even as a hero, but as a mirror, reflecting back the brilliance the world too often overlooks. 1 year, 1 voice, a revolution that began in silence and never stopped. Speaking. Spring returned, soft and golden, like a quiet promise whispered through the city streets. Maria's name was now etched into the very culture of the company, spoken not with awe, but with affection. People no longer introduced her as the janitor who became an executive. Now they simply called her Maria, the one who listens, the one who lifts, the one who remembers what it means to be unseen. On her final day of that transformational year, Maria didn't host a press conference, post a farewell video, or stage a dramatic goodbye. Instead, she left behind a single handwritten letter, taped to the inside of the janitor's closet door, where it had all begun. It read, "To the one who comes next. You may be holding a broom today. You may be delivering mail, wiping windows, or waiting tables. You may feel invisible in a world that doesn't look twice. But hear me when I say this. You are not your title. You are not your paycheck. You are potential waiting for someone to listen. And if no one listens, speak louder. And if no one looks, shine brighter. Because your worth is not waiting for permission. It is already here. And if they still don't, see you, build your own door, then hold it open for someone else. Maria Loba.